Today we're really going to talk about our conversation with him about medical things you need to really be aware of if you're a hiker in South Africa. In particular, we spent a lot of time on dehydration, but we also spoke about some of the other medical things that you really need to think about when you're hiking. Let's say you haven't been following this advice and you're now in a position where it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's hot, you don't really have shade, and you realize I'm now dehydrated. So, what do you do then?
You need to see how often you pee. That's the simple answer. If you're sort of getting this general feeling of malaise and you're just sort of a bit crampy and a bit sore, see that as your early warning sign.
I think there's an element here of you also being responsible for your fellow hikers.
And if you were to, ask me of a list of things to be worried about from a medical perspective on a hiking trail, I think that would be pretty much right at the bottom.
Hey, Robin, how's it?
Yeah, Lyndon, good, man. I believe you guys are making headway in the rebuilding of the roads after the second round of floods.
Finally, today we got all the campsites up and running. So all the roads are ready, all of the campsites have water, and that's for both Leopard and the Canyon Trail. Yeah, it was a good day. And then I also got a chance to go up Paradise Cliff with Franco. We went to go and check where the ladders were. It was fantastic. So the main ladder has been washed away a bit, the one that takes you up that final pool. The rest were all pretty much in place. So you and I are going to have to bring our wetsuits out on this weekend and go and figure out how to get that ladder back up at that main pool. So it's going to be cold.
And probably just to mention that, so people listening, it's not that they have to wear a wetsuit to swim through. It's because you and I are going to have to be in that water for a fair amount of time, inserting that ladder. So yeah, I can certainly imagine that. And talking about the floods, it's actually a great segue into our topic today, which is heat stroke, dehydration. Here we're talking about huge amounts of water, and in the dehydration, some of the stories we've got are when people are saying, "I wish I had water," because the trail generally has very little water. Paradise has water throughout the year. Day 4 has a little bit on the last 2 kilometers, but otherwise it's dry. So
it's crazy. I mean, listen, and on that note, it was 3 months ago, so literally 90 days ago, that we were having that heat wave.
Heat strokes, yeah.
Where you were getting, well, not only the heat strokes, but the heat wave itself, when you had those 3 to 4 days of 36 degrees, which is unusual. I mean, normally out here we'll get 1 or 2 days like that, but when you got 4 in a row, that was just crazy. So, weather patterns are definitely changing. And so anyway, so yes, that's why we wanted to have a chat today about dehydration.
Yep.
So we had a chat to Jacques Lawrence from George, a really good guy. Just quick some background. He is a paramedic that operates, he's got a private business that he operates out of George. You'll normally see him on all the trail run events in the area, trail runs, hikes, etc. When there's an event, he's the guy that everyone calls. He's kind of specialized in the space. So he really knows his stuff when it comes to trail running, mountain biking injuries, hiking injuries, adventure races. He's normally the guy the go-to guy. So really knows his stuff. Really appreciate, Jacques, that you took your time to chat to us. And if anyone has an event in this area and you need a guy, then he's definitely the one to go for. Unfortunately, the recording wasn't very good on that day. So his section came through well. I was in the Bavians. And so our conversation kept dropping. But today we're really going to talk about our conversation with him about medical things you need to really be aware of if you're a hiker in South Africa. In particular, we spent a lot of time on dehydration. But we also spoke about some of the other medical things that you really need to think about when you're hiking.
Yeah, and not snake bites, because that he also said is hardly have to talk about that at all, even though that's the thing that most hikers are paranoid about.
Let's listen to his clip quickly about what he said about that.
Exactly that. I mean, in the last 20 years, I think I've done maybe 1 or 2 snake bites. On the events, we've never had any. So, it's all the obvious answers. Snakes are scared. They don't like to hang around people. In terms of worrying about them in first aid, it's one of those things that happen very, very seldom. And if you were to, ask me of a list of things to be worried about from a medical perspective on a hiking trail, I think that would be pretty much right at the bottom.
in all my 20 years of you being in the farm and us doing those trails, I never have, and we've done it multiple times. So we know people have, but it's a insignificant statistic.
I mean, listen, in the 15 years of running the leopard trail, we've had one snake bite, and that was someone stood on it, so it was an accidental thing. So yes, snake bites. To everyone out there who's going hiking, you need to be aware of snakes, absolutely, and keep your eyes on the path. But from a medical perspective, it's pretty much the last thing you really need to be worrying about. You're far more likely to come down with some of the other stuff we're going to talk about today than you are going to have a snake bite. So yeah. But yeah,
I want to start by telling that story. As you mentioned, during that heat wave that we had a group that came back, and she shared her experience of her dehydration or heat stroke, right on top of the mountain there, and it lists some of the symptoms. She said she was very lightheaded, nauseous, headachy. No sun that she could, no shade that she could get into or get under. We'll chat about what she did, but she was obviously really concerned. So those were some of the symptoms that they shared. I mean, were there any others that Jacques mentioned off the top of your head?
Yeah, well, let's have a listen to him telling us what the first symptoms of dehydration are.
You need to see how often you pee. That's the simple answer. If you are halfway through the day and you haven't peed yet, that's not a good sign. And then you get your sort of early symptoms. I'll just sort of jump straight into the symptoms because that's what it boils down to. But if you're sort of getting this general feeling of malaise and you're just sort of a bit crampy and a bit sore, see that as your early warning sign and get fluids in sooner than later.
When I listened to Jacques, and I remember when we were having that conversation with him, I said, that sounds like every grumpy hiker in summer. If it's 36 degrees and you've been hiking since 8 in the morning and it's 12 o'clock, you are going to get grumpy. You're going to be a little lethargic. You're going to be, not necessarily a happier self unless you love summer hiking. So, I think those early symptoms, just because you're starting to get grumpy on a trail and it's 35 degrees and 12 o'clock doesn't mean you're coming down with dehydration. So, but it is, I guess, be aware of it. And in particular, if you are aware you haven't been drinking much or enough. But I mean, Robin, that's grumpy people on trails, right?
Yep. Well, I mean, let's chat then about what to do around that. If it is that a hiker is starting to feel that way, and what's probably a good precursor is it's not going to be the same for everyone. It's not going to be at a certain point in the trail, because on that particular day that this group had that experience, they said that was a very difficult day for them. But that was totally different experience from another group 2 days later. They came back and said that same day was the easiest for them because it was overcast and cool. So right off the bat, this is not just about how difficult and up and down the terrain is. It's going to be around how much fluid you continuously take in, not just in big gulps at the start of the day, in the middle of the day, but certainly that frequency. I think Jacques mentioned that quite a bit.
Well, before we get into that, so let's just talk about the later symptoms, because those were his early symptoms. He then did give us more info on what the later symptoms would be when it's actually becoming far more serious.
Yep.
I think most hikers would know what those are, but it's going to be, nausea, vomiting, headaches. Most people these days have got a smartwatch on. Your heart rate's a really good indicator. And you would sort of know what your baseline is. And typically dehydration, when your heart rate starts spiking and it doesn't come down, maybe it's your 80, 90, 100, that should be a very clear warning sign for you to, stop, get some shade, get some fluid in.
Those are the later symptoms. That's when you're in shit. Coming back to what you were saying earlier, what was really interesting about this conversation is he was saying, listen, if you get to a point where you're experiencing that, it's not too late. You still need to deal something about it, but in some ways you are too late because you don't fix dehydration in 1 hour. It gets fixed over 4, 5, 6 hours. So maybe anything you want to say on that, or shall we just jump into what he says?
It is actually because I wasn't aware of in the detail that he explained. I kind of thought, okay, I've got a bit of heat stroke, just get that liter of water into my system, put a wet towel on my head and keep going. And his comments were more it's not just a quick fix. This is something, as you mentioned, that actually you're going to have to deal with progressively over time. So we know that. Take sips continuously throughout the day. Interesting for me, the telltale sign of if you are drinking enough is you must be peeing a lot. In other words, if you're not peeing the whole morning, then you're not maybe getting enough fluids in. So that was also a good telltale sign for me.
And I think there's a few misconceptions. And the first one is that if I'm a bit dehydrated, well, I'm going to have a glass of water and, you just fix the problem. Unfortunately, dehydration is one of those things that develops over hours, but it also takes many hours to rehydrate or to fix the problem. And like I said, it's a slow recovery from tongue to toe doesn't happen in an hour. It could be 4, 5, 6 hours. It's a process of water is to go in, goes into your guts, goes into your kidneys, and then slowly over time into your cells. And unfortunately, the thing with being dehydrated is that might inhibit you from getting water in. If you're already nauseous and you're already feeling horrible, you drink water and boop, you cots it all out again. So the idea is not to get to that point. Maybe I can just go into a little bit of a chemistry slash science answer here. Your
Yeah.
kidneys are a passive filter, and they require passive pressure to bring water in, um, dilute the uric acid that's in your system, and then pass it out. So that means if you're going to gulp down 2 liters of water, you're going to end up peeing a lot of that water out straight away, simply because it's a passive filter. It doesn't store fluid and then manage it later. It's fluid in, fluid out. So typically, when it comes to hiking or being on a trail for long hours, it's advocated that you take lots of small sips constantly over a period of time.
All right, so there you have it. And yep, as he said there, the real way to stop dehydration is actually before you get it. I know that sounds silly, and that's by drinking early. If you know it's going to be a hot day, you got to start your drinking and putting fluids in early. So even, I mean, you and I, when we go hiking, we start hiking at 5 in the morning, 5:30 in summer. By 6:30, you got to be taking regular sips. You got to keep going. You can stop for coffee at 9 if you want, or a flask of tea or whatever, if that's what but you got to keep drinking all the time, little bits. You can't just kind of wait until it's 12 o'clock and then say, hey, let me have a liter of water with my lunch. That's not going to help on the dehydration side.
Yep. And he also said coffee, Coke, those kinds of things well, I don't want to say increase dehydration, but obviously are not as effective in flushing your system out as he's suggesting. It increases that the likelihood of getting more dehydrated as such. I'm still going to take my coffee in a flask, though. I mean, that's just something that's there. Yeah.
Well, you're right. So what he said, and we'll come back. I'll play that clip a little bit later. What he said is that if you're dehydrated, then drinking Coke or coffee as a solution to fix your dehydration doesn't help. So if you're drinking water and Coke throughout the day, let's say you're one of those hikers who likes walking with, a liter of water and a liter of Coke or whatever, or game, then that's not a problem. But if you are dehydrated and then you're taking something that's quite concentrated, whether it's a Coke, a game sachet, one of those rehydrate tablets, and you haven't got the balance right, that could actually make it worse. Maybe let's dive straight into that and actually see what he said about that here directly.
Yeah, so again, a little bit of a scientific answer. You can divide fluids into 3 forms. It can be a hypertonic solution, an isotonic solution, or a hypotonic, which just basically means it's got a high concentration of something or a low concentration, or a word that we've often heard is isotonic, meaning that it's electrolyte balanced. So most of the tablets that you get, provided that you mix it correctly with the right amount of water, would be an isotonic solution. And that's also quite important that you read the instructions, and if it says 1 tablet for half a liter or a game sachet for X amount of fluid, that you get it into the correct form. If something's too concentrated, let's say you take a game sachet or a tablet, but you only mix it with a small amount of water, that would become a hypertonic solution, meaning that it is in a state that will draw fluids towards it. So in other words, it might actually draw fluids out of your system to dilute and cause an equilibrium. So it's sort of fixed law of diffusion. Everything goes from a high concentration to a low concentration. So to answer your question, it is a combination of both. And most people would probably agree you need a bit of both. You just need your regular water. Maybe that's in your hydration kit. And then you've got some kind of electrolyte that you can mix into a separate water bottle. Having said that, it's always good to have more than one source of water, in that if you get a hole in your hydration kit or if you drop your water bowl and it breaks, it's not your only source of water, and that in itself could be quite a problem.
I mean, listening to him, what it made me think about is, let's say you haven't been following this advice, and you're now in a position where it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's hot, you don't really have shade, and you realize I'm now dehydrated. So, what do you do then? Is there anything that came out of what he said there that you really remember or struck you?
Well, it actually ties a bit back to, I asked him the question of, is heat stroke the same as the, dehydration? And he kind of said they in a similar process. And from what I remember, trying to cool down certainly does help, whether that is with fluids, like a wet. I know you often walk with a scarf or with those, like those small towels that you can actually just wrap on.
Most of the time, yeah.
So definitely that. But what I do recall is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but he said keep moving. I mean, you want to rest, but you don't want to just sit there and wait out, because it's not a 15-minute rest. You want to get the temperature down.
Let's hear what he had to say.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of variables on that one. It's depending on where exactly you are on the trail. Is there maybe a spot where you can get a bit of shade? I mean, I would hate to be stuck on a trail and then still be, in direct sunlight, because that's just going to exacerbate your condition. So, I mean, again, variables in mind, I would probably try and push for some kind of a shade so that I'm out of the elements. So I suppose you could also factor in how close you are to your hut, your finish point, versus maybe you've just started, you're feeling horrible, to maybe turn around and head back in the opposite direction, which is often counterintuitive, but it might be the right decision. Are you on the top of a hill with a nice breeze? Are you at the bottom of a cauldron section? The heat tends to really bake in the bottom of those valleys. Yeah, it would be considering all these different things that you might decide to push through slowly, see how you go, versus like, this is a good spot. We wait till it to cool down from 38 degrees down to 20 something, late afternoon hike. We can still kind of make base camp if we have to.
I mean, I think that makes sense, So if it's a hot day and there's no shade around, then don't just sit there in the sun and get worse, So definitely if you're realizing, okay, I'm in the shit, I've really got this. Some of my more serious symptoms are appearing: the nausea, the headaches, etc. I haven't drunk enough. You got to up your water, but not all in one go. So don't take a liter and think, okay, now I'm solved. You got to, take smaller amounts, 100 mils, 200 mils a cup. Then keep walking slowly. Maybe cover your head with something, wet it so that you are getting that cooling effect. But keep walking slowly. And then another 10, 15 minutes later, have more water, more sips, etc., just so that you're not stuck on top of the hill, and there's no shade. So that made a lot of sense to me, and certainly, in some ways, I'm not sure I would do that. I would have probably said, "Oh, lie down, let's just cover you." But I think there is a thing about this. It's going to take 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours to come right. So keep pushing and getting yourself closer until you do find some shade. So that made a lot of sense.
And I think there's an element here of you also being responsible for your fellow hikers, because from what I understand, when you are in that space, it's not that you become delirious, but you don't become as conscious of what's going on and what you're doing. So you might need to, as the fellow hiker, seeing one of your fellow hikers actually go into this or be in that state, you might need to be more responsible for them than just trusting that they're okay because they say that okay. And the next thing you know, they're walking off on a totally different tangent, which I've heard stories about as well.
Absolutely. All right, so you did mention it earlier. We had quite a long chat actually about tablets and goo and those rehydrates and stuff. So, and he did make some interesting points. So let's hear from him directly.
So, Lyndon, you actually asked him a very interesting, well, a humorous, but who knows, it could have been a relevant question, which is, should you drink your own pee if you run out of water? And what about withholding your pee in the belief that, well, if I keep it in, maybe then I'm going to reabsorb it, or my body won't feel that it's as dehydrated?
Yeah, I mean, listen, on that, I remember, 20 years ago, I was walking through the bush in Swaziland or up north. I can't remember where we were, and I needed a pee, so I stopped for a pee. And one of the guys I was walking with, he was quite a bit older than me, kind of probably in his 40s or 50s at the time. So I took his word as like he knew what he was saying. He said, "No, you mustn't pee because it's going to lead to dehydration." So that's why I asked Jacques about that, and he said, "No, listen, if you're going to pee, it's not actually that's not how much liquid you have in you is not the issue."
Well, definitely don't drink your own pee. That is a very bad idea. I think Bear Grylls, he got it wrong on that one. They've definitely debunked that a few times to say there's no real scenario where you want to be drinking your own pee. You're going to just further concentrate it's uric acid, so it's going to further concentrate the acidities and all these things in your body, and that's just a bad idea. I think when it comes to drinking
What
water
about
from
not
a
peeing?
stream,
What about
what's that?
not peeing? What about not peeing? Like, okay, I'm dehydrated, so I'm not going to pee. Or is it like, listen, if you need to go, go, because that's actually flashing the system?
Um, I mean, if you need to pee, you need to pee. I don't really know if there's any benefit to holding it in. Um, yeah, I'm not too sure about that one, but I've never heard about keeping your pee in will somehow rehydrate you. Once you're dehydrated, like I said, you are dehydrated. You need to get some kind of water in.
Well, I guess as we start also wrapping this up, if I can bring it back to some of the actual canyon trail specifics, because we deal with some of this in the different videos around how you manage the heat on the trail. And, just off the top of my head, we know that summer, a lot of sunlight in the day, but it sunrises early in the morning, and we always encourage groups to get going very early in the morning, whether it's 4:30, 5, 5:30, depending on when the light is up. It's a beautiful time of the day, but it's certainly going to give you a bit more space and time during the day. So that's definitely one way to manage the heat. And the other one, in the last about 3 months, of listening to hikers and seeing them in the briefing period when Donnelly and Franklin share with them, in summer, please take 5 liters of water, and in winter, maybe 3 liters. They come to me afterwards, some of the hikers, and they say, listen, five's a lot. I'm good with water. I'm just going to take 2 or 3. And we know that that might be fine for the perfect day. What I'm meaning by that is that might be you get through the day and it's what you need. A lot of challenges come, including that group that I chatted about when we first started, was one of the hikers didn't have enough water, ran out soon, and then the other one who she was walking with, who was a bit further back than the rest of the group, had to give her his. So he then ran out as they got later on the day. And that's part of the things that we actually are suggesting. When you take water, it's not just so that you calculate it to the last 10, 15 milliliters for the day for you. It's to take into account various things that might happen along those lines. So, yeah, 5 liters is what we suggest in summer, and take into account that it might be something that you've got to oversee for your hiking buddies as well.
Robin, what's your favorite mix? I mean, I've got my bladder in the back, which I think is a 3 liter bladder. And then I normally take at least a liter of something that's maybe a bit more exciting to drink. So throughout the hike, I'm constantly sipping at my bladder. I normally get back to base camp with about half a liter left. And then, when I actually stop, then I'll have like a nice sip of a game I don't really use game, probably a little bit of energy that I've diluted. I don't like things very strong anyway when I'm hiking, so I'll always dilute it. Actually, what I've taken to doing lately is I take the Boss iced tea and I'll put I think they're 330 ml Boss iced teas, and then I'll put that into a liter container and fill it up with water. So it's just giving me something different to drink, but it's not too sweet and sugary. And what's your favorite kind of mix of how you handle it?
Yeah, so 3 liter bladder in the backpack. That's the simple water. And then I have a bottle liter on the one side and a liter on the other side. One of those is definitely going to have a rehydrate of some sort, revive. And the other one, if it's winter, I'll definitely have the tea or coffee in a flask, or I'll actually just have it as another a spare thing of water in that. So, but it's interesting. You actually talked about the Boss tea. So I was just wanting to rehydrate myself. But you're right, these kinds of things, which we now actually stock on the Canyon Trail, so people can actually order them and get them delivered to their campsites as well. I mean, both you and I enjoy uh, kind of refreshing drinks that aren't just alcoholic. So that's a good option if someone wants something like that. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it.
All right, so I mean, let's move on. Actually, just before we move on, you know what I was thinking today? Because as I said earlier, we went to Paradise, and I was actually amazed. I was aware of this conversation that we were going to have today. I was actually paying a lot of attention to how I was drinking, and I realized in winter I probably run a bigger threat of getting dehydrated than I do in summer. Because for me, in winter, I actually just don't feel like drinking. It's like it's cold. I don't have that kind of constant urge. Whereas in summer, I'm always every 10 minutes, I'm taking a good sip on my bladder just to keep the fluids going. But I think in winter, I can still do a 4 hour hike. And unless I'm actually being conscious, I'll only drink a liter and a half. So that's something I've got to be far more aware of. And yeah, I manage my winter dehydration risk probably more than my summer one.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. We did speak to Jacques about a few other things. It wasn't just dehydration. I mean, it was interesting. You and I were having a chat to him about kind of what are the things that a hiker actually needs to know about medically. Dehydration is not the only thing that can happen. So there were things like what happens if someone in your group is fainting or gets severe cramps. Hypothermia was another one that we considered. Obviously, snake bites we looked at very briefly, and he said, "Don't worry," and we said, "Don't worry," because it's not there. We also spoke about things like anti-inflammatories and stuff. So let's maybe dive into some of these. Which one of those was really interesting for you?
Well, I do recall he said, make sure you have a space blanket with you. Those are just so small. They can fold up, but they create a barrier of warmth. And I think he was also talking, now that we're chatting about cold, I recall he actually said, if you are cold, you can obviously wrap it around you, or you can also take off your jersey or shirt, put that around you, and then your jersey or other layer over that. So it creates more of a kind of like multiple layers. So that was actually a relevant piece of information.
Hypothermia, if you can keep moving, it's probably a good thing. Obviously, you have to consider the environment and what's happening around you. Is it a thunderstorm? Is the wind howling? Are you injured? But when you stop, you typically get a lot colder. I think it's quite standard for most hikers to have at least a space blanket and some extra warm clothes in their bag. So that's always a must. You should never leave anywhere with at least, without a space blanket. And I can also just add that you lose most of your heat through your head. They say you can lose up to 70% of your heat through your head versus the 30% the rest of your body. So having a beanie is essential. If you can keep your head warm, that's a very good start. And then keeping the wind out of your wet clothes, because there you get the chill factor, which can be quite problematic. Now you've got wet clothes, and to make matters worse, you have cold air passing through that, which, the chill factor can vastly exacerbate the cooling down process.
Okay, so actually maybe getting your space blanket out, wrapping it around you while you're walking, but don't stop. So don't necessarily just stop around the floor and wrap it up, but actually get it out, wrap it around you. Probably stops most of the wind, adds a bit of that heat retention, and then keep walking.
Yeah. And if it isn't raining, you could actually layer. You could do sort of a base layer, space blanket, and then put something over that. Obviously, the space
Got it.
blanket tends to flap around a lot, which is not fantastic, but you want to create sort of insulation layers where you're insulating a barrier, so like a jersey or a warm top, and then the space blanket. A lot of people think you should put the space blanket directly on the skin, which doesn't really help for the warming. It might keep the wind off you, but you want to create a barrier, like a blanket or like I said, a jersey for that, and then the space blanket, and then on the outside of that, something just to keep all of that together.
But one of the bits that's interesting for me is so I walk with that space blanket. Um, I'm trying to figure out how I would, if there was someone getting hypothermia and we're walking and you don't want to stop, how would that person wear it? It's all very well if you're putting someone on a stretcher and you get a blanket and you put that over them, then the space blanket and then another blanket. Great. But if I'm wanting to keep hiking, so you're obviously going to take probably a jacket or figure out some way of probably putting the space blanket around your core body section. But you still want clothes underneath. You're not just going to go straight space blanket onto skin and then put your jacket on again. So that was interesting for me. I'm almost thinking, I wonder if,
I'll get like a poncho. Yeah.
and I always walk with duct tape. So I'd probably cut it, wrap
Yeah.
it around this section, tape it so that it forms like a thing, and then put my jacket over that. Just to, listening to what he said, that would probably be my best.
Yep. And, again, talking first aid scenarios, it's also, I mean, if you're moving, that's great. You could keep keep warm. But if someone hurts their ankle, sprains a knee, and needs to lie down and it's cold, then you're definitely going to need something like that space blanket. So actually, I mean, do we have them in the shop there? Do we sell them?
Yeah, Leopard Trail does, and this one as well.
Yeah, because that's something that definitely you should have on your list. It's just so small, so light, and I think when you really need it, you're going to be grateful that you've got it.
I mean, every hiker should have a space blanket in your kit. It should be one of the first
Yeah.
things you put in. Even if it's summer, the amount of times on the Leopard Trail where we've had something, let's say something goes wrong and you think, okay, not a problem. We send someone out. We send our team with the stretcher.
Yep.
It's before you know it, it's 7 o'clock at night,
Yep.
and the guys getting chilled because they haven't planned on being there in the evening. And even in the middle of summer, the nights here can be quite chilly. And so, you always it's so light. It really is a lifesaver. So those things must be.
I think the duct tape's also a really good idea. I know you actually spend more time fixing people's shoes, keeping their soles on than actually anything else.
Yeah, that's why I take it, because
Yeah.
a lot of people they come here with their favorite pair of hiking shoes that they haven't worn in a year, and then they, within day two, the front of the sole is flipping, and so we just literally duct tape it up. So yeah, I always hike with duct tape. Really good to have.
But it's a great one. Whether you've got to bind a splint with it or cover a cut if you have to. I mean, it's a great one to have in a first aid kit as well, or in your backpack as a backup. Definitely.
All right, so he also spoke about fainting. Let's have a listen to what he said about when someone faints with you on the trail. And he did mention that it could be partly related to a dehydration scenario, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So let's have a listen.
Yeah, so fainting is usually as a result of a sudden drop of blood pressure. So could be psychogenic, you get bad news, vessels dilate, blood pressure drops, you tend to fall over. So the trick there is to kind of get the blood pressure to come back up a bit. So if the person's lying flat, they improve their ability to get their blood pressure up again. So obviously your heart is now in line with your body, so it can kind of stabilize itself. You could also lift their legs up, which would then cause a bit of pooling, blood going back down towards the heart. Basically the opposite of standing. If you're standing up, your heart has to now work hard to push blood to your brain and to the rest of your body. Whereas when you're lying flat, it's not going to promote circulation. So typically lie them flat, lift up their legs, maybe splash a bit of water on their face for dramatic effect. Other than that, give them a bit of time just to sort themselves out. Yeah.
If someone was fainting on the trail, I'd be terrified, because not having a medical background, I'd be absolutely worrying around what could be going on. If it is a drop of blood pressure, then, probably, as he said, it might be related to dehydration or to food or whatever. So get them so that their body's lying down. But yeah, this one still scares me. I think I'm far more comfortable now having to deal with dehydration on the trail than if I have someone who's fainting for no reason.
Well, you probably find as well, someone who faints is going to have a cut injury when they fall. This isn't just the sandy beach that you're falling on. This is rugged mountains, so there's sharp rocks everywhere. So, the faint is the one thing, and then dealing with if they fall onto a rock and they actually cut something as well. So, again, I quite like the duct tape idea. As long as you've also got other kind of bandagey stuff, you might need that for more than just the sole of a foot or your shoe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Moving on, let's have a listen to what he said about cramps.
That kind of also now ties in with the dehydration conversation because that's often a result of an electrolyte imbalance, be it salt or one of the other ones, magnesium, calcium. So cramps, there's a lot of anecdotal things around taking Rennies, which is a antacid. I don't know, maybe it's more in your mind than anything else. Try it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, cramps, a lot of times they say stretching it out is probably the best. Um, I can't give you the full scientific answer as to why, but it has to do with promoting blood back into the cells and so stretching out helps. Obviously, getting fluids in, and if you think it's a salt thing, get a bit of salts. Yeah, I suppose it's always a good thing to have a few emergency electrolyte tablets or a magnesium tablet that you keep aside for those kind of situations.
Listening to him here talking about this reminded me, I think we were probably in our early 20s and we went to Madagascar. And remember, I asked Ivan, our friend who was a doctor, and said, listen, if I started really struggling with dysentery or something and was vomiting a lot, what's the best medicine? And he said, take a 2-liter bottle of Coke, shake it vigorously to get rid of a lot of the bubbles, and then add, I think it was a tablespoon or a teaspoon of salt. And because get both the sugars and the salts back into your body as long as fluids, and you probably won't vomit it out again or won't move through your system as quickly. So just, listening to him talk here about the fact that often things like cramps are also related to maybe that there's a dehydration or lack of some of the key minerals that you're needing. So what was interesting, and I don't think it was in this conversation, might have been when we were talking beforehand, he said that one of the first things he would put in his medical kit was a pill for diarrhea. So that, if on the trail you get diarrhea, that's one of the things you can deal with a pill. And, it's such a small little thing to have in your kit that everyone should have that in their medical aid kit as well.
Oh, interesting. Coming back to that dysentery, the Madagascar thing, I mean, you got hectic dysentery that trip. I can't remember if we took Ivan's advice and gave you Coke with sugar. I don't think we could because we were in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't get you Coke if that was the thing we had to get. But yes, that was hectic, that one. I mean, remember that donkey cart thing we had to put you into? Oh. Yes. Oh my word. Wow.
Yeah, it was this, for everyone listening, it was this proper wooden old, middle of rural Madagascar on the coast.
In the 90s.
And we were hours and hours away from any town or village. It was weird. Long story how we got there, but and so I was lying on the side of this dirt track, and this guy came past in this wooden cart. It wasn't a donkey; it was pulled by an ox, one of those zebu, Madagascan zebus, and it was a wooden thing. And I remember lying on the back because he was going to take us to the nearest village. And I just remember lying there, and I don't know if you guys were mean or we just forgot, but I remember my head constantly bumping against the wood. I was so, I'd been shitting nothing but water for days, and
it turned bloody.
Yeah, it was just crazy. I'd drink water, 10 minutes later it would be coming out. So it was like I wasn't fully there. And now in hindsight, I'm like, why didn't you guys just give me a pillow under my head, you bastards? It's like, was it that hard? Anyway,
I have a photograph. I'm going to go and check because I promise you we didn't just say, ha, ha, ha. We were crap worried. We're in the middle of nowhere and you were sick, man.
That was serious. Yeah. I remember seeing a photo like a week after we took a photo, and I was like Gollum.
Yeah, very thin.
My ribs sticking out. It was crazy. Not lekker.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on. Really interesting conversation. Probably the thing that surprised me most of our entire chat with him was about anti-inflammatories and ibuprofens and whether you should take them when you're on the trail. So let's hear what he had to say about that.
So your ibuprofens specifically are quite hard on your kidneys. So, if you do get them, read the label, use due diligence. So two problems. The one is that it's quite hard on your kidneys. Now you take this scenario where you are dehydrated, hiking quite far, that could put a bit of extra strain on your kidneys. And then the second thing is it does mask symptoms. So a lot of people think, I feel better now. I've just popped 5 paracetamols and 2 ibuprofens. I feel better, therefore I can carry on. Just remember you're masking symptoms, so that injury might still continue. The fact that you're not feeling as much pain doesn't mean that the problem's gone. It just means it's now being masked. So if anything, when you get to base camp and you're well hydrated, maybe there's a better opportunity to take a anti-inflammatory so that it has the effect while you're sleeping, so that the next morning the inflammation is not as bad. But while you're hiking and you're already feeling sore, just consider those things. Yeah.
I mean, this one's interesting because I always walk with Nurofen, and if someone gets sore, I say, hey, take a Nurofen. So maybe I need to stop doing that.
Yeah, I think the thing about masking symptoms is really significant. It's again, you're out in the middle there of some rugged mountains, and as you know, it's not that a helicopter can come pick you up. You're gonna have to find a way to get back, or you're gonna have to wait for guys to come and carry in your stretcher, and that's not an easy one to do either. So, got to be really present to all of these things.
Anyway, so that was it from our conversation with Jacques. What I'm really curious about, Robin, these are the things that we come up with, but please, for everyone who's listening, dump in the comments any of your first thoughts around the issues we've been talking about, but any other medical things that you think a hiker should be paying attention to and what to do about it. So yeah,
Well,
really,
one actually that comes to mind, but I don't have the answer for you. It came up on actually one of like the Facebook feeds, what to do in a thunderstorm when there's lightning. Is it that you carry on walking? Is it that you get off from the top of the mountain? I mean, you and I have been hiking in Italy.
Yeah,
Yeah, Florence. Yes. And that lightning came and both of our hair went whing like this, and we remember we got on all fours and we had to crawl across the field because we were paranoid. So I don't know. We need to find out what, because we know that the Baviaanskloof has thunderstorms in summer and there's lightning.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's see what people say in the comments around lightning. Anyway, Robin, great to chat to you again.
Yeah, cool.
You can have me on tomorrow, eh?
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.
So remember, bring your wetsuit. We're heading up Paradise on the Canyon Trail tomorrow. So
I think you should be worried that I'm going to be bringing yours. Your wife dropped it off, so I can bring it up with you tomorrow.
Okay. All right. See you tomorrow.
Cool. Okay. Cheers. Cheers, everyone. Bye.